Hello everybody and welcome back to the Jack Threlfall Show. We are back with an upgraded camera and hopefully some consistent audio quality. This week we are talking through 5 iconic songs from the history of Formula One. The history of music in Formula One goes back just as far as the history of the sport itself, from the Beatles to the opera to even some techno classics. Formula One's always been tied to music, and in this video we're talking about 5 iconic songs that you need to know. Okay, so song number 1 in this list of 5 iconic Formula One songs is Lift Me Up by the British artist Moby. This song was used on the ITV TV Intro from 2006 to 2008, and those were some pretty iconic years in Formula One. We had, of course, Michael Schumacher's first retirement, Jenson Button's win in Hungary, Lewis Hamilton's debut, his battle with Kimi and Fernando in 2007, and, of course, the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2008. And for many people my age, it was moments like that that drew us to Formula One, our first memories of Formula One. And this Moby song was on that TV intro. And we can think about now how iconic the current intro is. We'll get into that later, the Bryan Tyler current F1 theme, as well as we got the chain coming up. We're going to go through all sorts of history today, and we're starting with Moby because I think it's a really interesting track, a bit of a maverick choice to put on the intro. It's a bit out of left field, right? It was a detachment from the rock, the kind of classical rock that had been associated with F1, and a lot of people had connected the chain, so it was important to ITV, I think, to kind of make a step away. Both as a single artist and a producer, Moby played a massive role in the surging popularity of techno music through the kind of late 90s and the early 2000s, and it was really changing what was in the charts. There was this evolution, I think, from like the rock of the 80s to some kind of dance music getting in the top of the charts, and then this wave of like electro techno, and then that's kind of carried on to like the house and the garage that we see today. That connection actually between DJs and Formula One, I think, is carried on by young Mr. Lando Norris and his DJing hobby. And if you find yourself lucky enough to be in a club in Monaco, you might see him playing there. Lift Me Up was released in 2005 and reached number 18 in the UK singles charts. Hopefully in this video, I'll do an okay job at kind of balancing, going back and forth between my usual ramblings and the very limited amount of research that I have done for this video. As I said, reached number 18 in the UK singles charts. The style of the song is really interesting, actually. It builds through the intro with this kind of thumping kick drum and the mix of kind of a live band, live drums, 2 guitars, and then this kind of electronic keyboard note, and the backing vocals, and then this kind of chanting chorus, which is the bit that was sampled in the intro. So it builds with this kind of bass guitar and the kick drum, then the strings come in, the backing vocals come through for the chorus as we're chanting, lift me up, you know. If you needed your memory jogged, I'm not going to try and sing every song, but that one's quite easy. The notes, you know, it can seem quite simple, quite reductionist to just call it an F1 song. So in the bit of research that I was trying to do, I found some words from Moby on his old website when he was referencing kind of what the song was about and the true meaning. And it goes a little bit deeper than I think just an F1 theme song. It's quite interesting, especially in the context of the time compared to now. So these are some words from Moby's website, his reflection on the song. So excuse me for reading off my notes here. Lift Me Up is about the human propensity towards turning off our higher critical rational cognitive functions and willfully and enthusiastically degenerating to an atavistic tribal state wherein we don't judge things from an empirical rational perspective, but rather from a limbic feral tribal perspective. So he's, you know, talking about the duality of man and our cognitive functions. And I think Lift Me Up is almost satirical in how people can get involved in like the chant of Lift Me Up. I think it's more, I don't know, it's quite layered, right? It's kind of odd. As I spoke about, you know, it was used in the intro, but it also kind of, it has this deeper meaning. And in the chorus, he goes, lift me up, lift me up, lift me up, now I'm and the "amma" bit sounds like complete gibberish. And I'm sure a lot of people would just think it's like this kind of vague, you know, whatever, filler note to just keep the chorus on beat. But another bit of information, bit of research I was able to pull from Moby's website, and it tells us that the "amma" sound was a word that he created because he was trying to talk about this religious idea and how people get connected to religions. And the "amma" sound is a combination of like all the different names of gods kind of end in this "ah." So you got Buddha, Jehovah, Allah, Krishna. And for Moby, you know, this is not my original point, but for Moby, he kind of had this idea to make the sound "amma" as like that recognition of all the different gods, like uniting them into one, right? And that chant towards them is then the representation, like that's what AMA serves. If that's all a little bit too deep and wishy-washy, you're probably right. It doesn't have much connection to Formula One, but I do think it's really interesting to kind of hear that deeper meaning behind it. The track and the accompanying video evolved throughout the years from 2006, 7 to 8. I'll put some screenshots up now. It was really interesting to see like the creative choices made there. One of the things that'll stand out is, you know, David Coulthard looking mysterious in his kind of James Bond suit, Monaco casino kind of vibe. Then you've got, of course, the lovely model who seems trapped in a checkered flag at one point. Another point, she's getting attacked by snakes. You've got the lovely, I think, Japanese chap who does some ceremonial dancing. The skylines of Bahrain and Shanghai can be seen in the background. It's really interesting to see what they've layered it with. There's some, like, I think there's a roulette wheel that goes around, you know, another connection to Monaco, I suppose. The specific version of the Moby song used in the video is slightly kind of up-tempo, slightly sped up, and then it's layered with the different engine sounds, right? So in 2006, it was actually the first year where we dropped the V10. We went to a 2.4-litre V8 engine, you know, the noise of which was still pretty mega, and we can wish for now, makes current F1 cars look pretty tame by comparison. But yeah, I think it did a really good job at kind of building that tension of differentiating the ITV broadcast to what we were used to on the BBC. And of course, they were very, very lucky that they happened to get some pretty amazing years of Formula One. So that's the first of the iconic Formula One songs, Moby, Lift Me Up, from the ITV intro. On to the next. Okay, so the second song that we're talking about in this video, and arguably the most iconic, right? We spoke about Moby, how ITV were trying to create something different to what people were used to, particularly in the UK. People have always had this connection between BBC Formula One coverage and Fleetwood Mac's The Chain, right? And that's the second song we're going to be talking about today. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of insight to maybe people like myself who always associated it with Formula One, that iconic bass riff that comes about 3 minutes in, and you hear the engines rev up, and that coverage, you know, just like people's memories of the ITV, that first time you watch Formula One, the music that plays in the intro, right, that's always going to stay in your head, that kind of sensory connection. And Fleetwood Mac's The Chain, for many, will be the song that they always associate with Formula One. It's been a part of the BBC broadcast since 1978, and it's still used today on the BBC Sport F1 podcast with our friend of the show, Jack Nichols, who definitely doesn't respect me very much because I messed up my interview with him, but we'll get to that later. The song The Chain by Fleetwood Mac was written in 1976 and released in 1977. The interesting thing about it really is it was on the Rumours album, which is one of the best-selling albums of all time, one of the most iconic rock albums of all time. But it's the only song that all 5 members of Fleetwood Mac are given writing credits for, and it kind of leads into the, you know, disconnected format of it, where it kind of goes through all these different phases. It's like really a kind of an epic tale. And the deeper meaning of the song really is about the disconnect in the band. If you know anything about Fleetwood Mac, you know that, I mean, I'll put the graph on the screen now. I was doing my research for this video. There's this brilliant graph on Wikipedia that shows all the different members, the different formations that Fleetwood Mac has taken throughout the years. There are many. It's a very, very complicated graph, but there were 5 members at the time it was being recorded, and it kind of has this juxtaposition of harmony and this lovely layering and kind of all the, it seems so perfect. It seems like it couldn't have been so disconnected and fractured when they were recording it. But I think the amazing thing about the reality of it is that it really was. On the stylistic and the musical level, it's kind of about the breakdown of these personal relationships, right? And if the phrase stylistic breakdown and juxtaposition and harmony sounds like a bit of limp-wristed twaddle, then you're probably right. As I said, the inconsistency is best explained by that Wikipedia graph. The lead female vocalist of the band, Stevie Nicks, and the lead electric guitarist, Lindsey Buckingham, it's kind of about their breakup, right? At the time of the recording of the album, not only The Chain itself, but all these different songs on the album are like written by band members about other band members, right? So you had, you know, Nicks and Buckingham were kind of going through this very intense breakup, and they were taking it out on each other through the album. And the sad thing about it, I suppose, is that the magic of that really tragic energy and that anger and that rage shows through and might be the main driving force why it's all so good. It reminded me a little bit of how Paul McCartney and John Lennon, after the breakup of the Beatles in the early 70s, they kind of used that anger and that regret that they had towards each other as a fuel to make music about, right? So alongside the breakup of Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, there was the divorce of John and Christy McVie, who were also integral members of the band at that time. And it was John McVie, who was the bass player, who played that iconic boom, boo, 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 that bit, the riff. Yeah, I really apologise for that terrible bass guitar impression there. But that kind of fire, that inspiration, really drove the track, and you can kind of feel that anger come through in the vocals from Christine too. Mick Fleetwood, the only member, of course, Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac, the Mac then being taken from McVie to form the band name. Mick Fleetwood, he had a great section on Top Gear. They were kind of asking him about what it was like to be in a band that was breaking up, and was always fighting. It was just 5 people that hated each other. He was caught in the middle, basically. He had these 4 people that all hated each other. He's the drummer who, in many people's eyes, in music, it's the drummer that holds the band together musically, playing that background, keeping the time, and a super complicated instrument to play. And Mick Fleetwood, one of the great drummers of all time, he was holding the band together not only on the musical level, but on the personal, right? Trying to keep people away from each other at the right time, trying to keep them together. And he'd reflected really well in the Top Gear interview. Of course, I'll put a link in the description. I would go check it out. He's a pretty quick driver too, and a big fan of cars. Got an amazing car collection, Mick. And the magic of the chain really was that while it was so disconnected internally, what we got out of that was this incredible song. So the guitar riff, as I mentioned, played by John McVie, it was played on an Alembic S1 bass guitar, which of course I'll put on screen now. And it was also this resonator guitar that is on the verse riff, which is a Rick Turner 1C LB, which was his main stage guitar. And then they've got a Dobra, So the electric guitar is the Rick Turner Model 1C LB, which is used, of course, for the electric guitar parts of the song. And then you've got this kind of acoustic resonator sound on the intro and the verse riffs, which was a Dobro resonator guitar. Again, I'll put that on screen now. A few little random facts I was able to find doing the research. The bass guitar that was used in the recording and on stage on Fleetwood Mac's live shows to record that iconic riff in the chain was actually sold at auction, sold for $100,000. And people who have watched my Rolex Daytona video will know that $100,000 in the world of racing connected memorabilia is very little. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the 18 million that Paul Newman's Rolex Daytona fetched. And if you've got any Rolex Daytonas sitting at home, feel free to send them into the show. I'll accept those very much. I think another interesting thing about the chain and its connection to Formula One is that it wasn't only used as an intro for Formula One, but actually in the Fleetwood Mac live shows when they would play together, when they were all happy enough and able to play live together, they would use the chain as an intro for their live shows. So even the band themselves, they kind of recognize this amazing connection. And I think maybe people even going to that show for the first time, they would think, oh my God, this is it's the band from the Formula One song. And they used that energy that the song brought to introduce their live show. So even at that time, music fans and F1 fans alike were able to recognize the real brilliance that we were treated to by that song. As I mentioned, it was used throughout basically all of the history of Formula One on radio and television with the BBC through the Murray Walker, the James Hunt years, when F1 really exploded like worldwide in the 90s. And of course on the world broadcast where people would use the BBC broadcast, they would use that song, the Chain too. And it was a bit of a tough moment. We'll get into later how Liberty Media had replaced the Chain when they took over in 2016, 15. They had to create a new song, right? Bryan Tyler had to come in, compose this new deviation from the norms of Formula One intro music, and he came up with this incredible original song to replace the Chain. But it was a pretty epic one. And of course, I'd love to know what people's first memories. Was it Moby that you first heard on an F1 intro? Was it the Chain? And it's always a song that people will remember to this day. But yeah, I think that's enough rambling from me on the Chain. We can move on to the third song, and we're going to talk a bit more about that Bryan Tyler intro that replaced the Chain with the Liberty Media takeover. Okay, moving swiftly along here, the third iconic F1 song that we're talking about today is the current F1 intro music, the one that plays on the world feed, a song that was dedicated for Formula One with that Liberty Media takeover. So in late 2016, for $4.6 billion, the current owners of Formula One purchased it, and they thought, right, just like ITV did back in 2006. We need our own connection to Formula One, right? We need something that people will hear, will ingrain in their minds, someone that watches a race for the first time, someone that watches every practice qualifying session, something that they're always going to associate with our version of Formula One, right? Not the BBC one, not the ITV one, the new Liberty Media Formula One that's going more worldwide, one that's embracing the US, one that was everything that they wanted it to be back in 2016, and we've seen progress over the years with the sport being sold to the Saudis, really. Anyway, the iconic F1 song number 3 is, yes, the current F1 intro theme, composed by Bryan Tyler, specifically for Liberty Media. Tyler was a massively experienced Hollywood composer, so it was a bit of a switch between going for a traditional music artist who's making stuff in the charts, who's making kind of whatever, classic rock music, house music, the things like Moby and Fleetwood Mac, to make the switch to a Hollywood, like a movie theme composer, is a bold call, but also probably the right one, because they're looking to almost make it more of like that movie, that drama kind of atmosphere. So yeah, Tyler's worked on franchises like Fast and the Furious, incredible soundtracks there, particularly Tokyo Drift, and also the Marvel comics. So not the Avengers theme per se, that was Alan Silvestri, but the music that plays in the Marvel movies when they're doing the logo, like with the comic books, when the Marvel logo comes on screen, like that little kind of orchestral theme is a Bryan Tyler original, and it's little things like that that F1 was looking for. There's a really insightful interview done actually by Red Bull, by the Red Bull kind of .com website back in 2019. And they were talking to Bryan Tyler about how the current F1 intro music came about, what his history was with F1, all those sorts of things. And the brilliant thing for me reading that was finding out that he's a real fan. Like he really watches practice and qualifying, and for his whole life he's been an F1 fan. So when he got this email to like join F1 to say, hey, do you want to be like our title composer, right? Do you want to compose one of the main, most important things about an F1 broadcast, the intro music? Bryan Tyler was kind of given this amazing opportunity, and he jumped at it. And the thing he noted was that Formula One didn't know that he was a massive fan before they offered it to him. It was just kind of that wonderful, I don't know, serendipitous coincidence, I suppose. But he talked about the inspiration. He was kind of met with this writer's block at the start. The inspiration for the song was the emotional journey that watching a Formula One race takes, watching a Formula One season takes, when it's not pure happiness. It's not one big wrong rising crescendo to a win. The F1 theme music, it plays over the graphics of all the drivers, right? So you see all the drivers from the back of the grid to the front, and it has to be long enough where it accounts, you know, it doesn't just build to one single point. It doesn't just add layers and then stop after 30 seconds like the ITV intro. Because Liberty are so focused on kind of forging this connection to the drivers to get people more personally invested and personally involved in the ups and downs of Formula One and the lives of the drivers, that was a big part of the inspiration for the music. So it kind of goes through all these ebbs and flows of like rising and falling and happiness and sadness and ups and downs and joy and despair. And for Tyler, that was the inspiration, right? That was the idea of like, that's how he experienced Formula One. That's how the music should represent Formula One, because it isn't just going to be one of those pure victories. It's going to be a sport that's going to test your emotions. If you're going to be a Ferrari fan, right, you might get a few races a year. You might get, oh my God, an Italian Grand Prix. Ferrari wins, incredible, triumphant. Then they'll get an engine DNF or a strategy failure, but then you'll still be a fan. You'll come back week after week for the little victories, the ups and downs, the triumph, the tragedy, all those sort of things. And as I mentioned, yeah, that was like the inspiration, right? And I think it was really well captured. We think now as that intro, like that is perfect. It's the main one. I mean, even going back to like the end of 2021, everyone watching that race live, hearing that classic F1 theme music kick in as we're seeing this intro of Max and Lewis and their battle throughout the year and everything that happened in that race, everything it came down to, the intro music felt perfect, right? Like it's obvious to say, but he did an amazing job with trying to come up with that. And yeah, it's really like an orchestral composition. So as I said, it evolves through like multiple phases. The wind, the brass, the strings come in, and they all play a different role in telling the story of what Tyler aimed to achieve, right, in this F1 song. And I think he did exactly that. And I think that's the reason why it needed to be included in this video when we talk about current F1 songs. It was a massive task. And I think arguably did a much better job than the Moby song did for ITV, because Liberty were willing to take that investment of getting a full dedicated composed song. And there's an amazing live version where he's, you know, properly being a composer, right? Like he's at the center of this amazing, I don't know, 30-piece whatever orchestra, and you get to see Tyler like in person, the passion that he's got for this song that he's worked on, and everything that has to come together to make it sound as good as it does. Hearing it live is a great expose of the energy, the precision, and maybe there's some similarities there, right, to an F1 team and to an orchestra. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I think there's got to be something there, right? Like each one playing their part, playing different parts, working in a team, working to the same time, to the same goal, each kind of coming together to become more than just a sum of their parts. Maybe that's a good metaphor, maybe it's not, but I'm definitely going to leave it in the video because I think it's clever. But yeah, I think that's kind of all you need to know. I'll leave a link to the Red Bull interview if you want to hear more. I'll leave a link, of course, to the live version, and to some more of Tyler's work, because he's a really, really great composer, and yeah, a really bold choice. And that's a little bit more detail on the current F1 live song. Right, so on to number 4, moving swiftly along here again. Okay, so song number 4 in the 5 iconic Formula One songs video is a bit of a personal favourite from me. And if you're a Beatles fan, this is going to be your favourite segment of the video, because we're talking about Faster by George Harrison. And this is going to be a bit of a history lesson. I'll try and keep it interesting, try and speed it up as much as I can. But I think there's some really valuable stuff here. And it's really interesting to see this crossover between the rock legends of the world, the great musicians, and their passions for Formula One. And one of the most legendary musicians of all time was a massive Formula One fan and really played a role in F1 history. And that is George Harrison. As an F1 fan since his youth, he recalled in an interview his early memories of Formula One at the 1955 Aintree British Grand Prix. Harrison was a lover of all things motor racing, 2 wheels, 4 wheels, and throughout the 60s, even his time with the Beatles, they were photographed at the Monaco Grand Prix as F1 kind of went through this transition of being a sport for rock stars, right? Making the drivers into these stars, inviting celebrities, getting out to Monaco, all that kind of stuff. The Beatles were some of the first. So, you know, people complain today, oh, Miami Grand Prix, whatever, it's just filled with celebrities. In the 60s, the Beatles were those celebrities, and there weren't many people complaining then. And they got this entrance. Of course, George, a fan before that, then given this entrance, it was like an amazing opportunity for him to meet his heroes, to get involved in the paddock like we really all dream of, right? Like being a paddock insider, being recognized, being welcomed into the paddock, and kind of, you know, making friends with everyone that was in there. For Harrison, it was drivers like Ronnie Peterson, Jackie Stewart, James Hunt, Niki Lauda. He was really close personal friends with all of these people, and hopefully I'll find some pictures in my great research, put them on screen now. Yeah, if I've done my due diligence. Harrison maintained this connection after the Beatles broke up through the 70s, and it really grew and grew and grew as he had more time to himself, more time to pursue his own passions. He was seen more and more at Grand Prix and trackside, and that love for the sport, that inspiration that he had when he was connected to cars, the noise, the energy, the elements of consciousness that are tested in high-speed motor racing, it kind of found this connection with him, and maybe it seems like a bit of a juxtaposition to his lifestyle. You know, he was the quiet Beatle. He was the one kind of brought them to India, embraced this spirituality, a bit of psychedelics, you know, that kind of natural, peace-loving guy. And then he had this duality that he was a massive Formula One fan. He loved the noise, the anger, the passion for loud cars and, you know, whatever. And yeah, as I said, that was the inspiration for the song Faster. The song was written and recorded in 1978 and released in 79. It was on his self-titled album, George Harrison, I think his 4th album since the Beatles had broken up. And it wasn't one of the songs that he'd written and had suppressed in his time during the Beatles, but I think definitely being a part of his solo career, it was an opportunity to kind of write songs about his individual passions. And actually, sadly, it was the death of Ronnie Peterson at the 1978 Italian Grand Prix that was memorialized in this song. You know, the passion for Formula One was there before, but I think for Harrison, particularly the death of Ronnie Peterson, a close personal friend of his, hit him quite hard. And to kind of memorialize the legends he viewed the drivers as, in a song was a way of kind of honoring that memory. So yeah, you know, drivers like Peterson and Stewart in the 70s were real legends. Peterson, a two-time runner-up in the World Championship. He was a runner-up in the season in 1978 that was eventually won by Mario Andretti. You know, of course, dying late in the season took him out of World Championship contention, a minor consequence, of course, of death, but that is the reality, is that death was what gave Andretti the title. And as we see many times in Formula One, in those days when there's an accident, that there's no celebration, and Andretti, you know, very quietly accepted this title and kind of lamented the tragedy of it. Alongside the memory of Peterson, the 70s were an amazing time in Formula One. You know, fans of F1 media will recall the movie Rush about the 1976 World Championship with Niki Lauda and James Hunt, everything they went through in their personal battles off and on track, and of course, Niki Lauda's accident at the Nordschleife, the Nürburgring, his, you know, near-death experience, pulled out of a burning car, you know, irreparably changed for the rest of his life, but willing to, as soon as possible, get back in the car and to test his skills after all that accident recovery, you know, was another source of inspiration, right, for George Harrison. The video for the song Faster is really cool. It features Jackie Stewart, you know, long hair and a cap. He's a cabbie or a chauffeur for George Harrison, who's in the back strumming his acoustic guitar and singing the song. It opens actually with shots of all sorts of drivers, from Graham Hill to Jim Clark to Niki Lauda, the legends of Formula One at that time, again memorialized in this song. And it really shows the passion that Harrison had. The notes that are heard on, you know, the intro to the song, the engine notes of Formula One cars, those were recorded by Harrison in the gantry at Formula One tracks. Like, he was a fan like all of us who wants to take home their own memories of the races. And I just think that's really cool that his passion extended that long. And you know, these legendary drivers too were on the cover for the single. Let me just scroll down quickly in my notes here. Oh yeah, of course. So Graham Hill, we mentioned he's featured in the video. He's been seen with the Beatles and with Harrison, of course, a legend in the 60s of British motorsport and British culture in general, right? When people started to view these racing drivers as the legends that they were, the true daredevils and the sporting heroes. That connection to the Hill family extended with Harrison even to Damon Hill, Graham Hill's son, of course, 1996 world champion. In his early days, George Harrison was a personal sponsor of Damon, giving him the cash to kind of get into Formula One, to make it through those early junior Formula stages where you're really just burning up money. Prize money is never going to cover the expenses, so you need to have those personal sponsors to make it through, and that was what George Harrison provided. So, you know, the legend that is Damon Hill of British motorsport, of course, one of the amazing father-son world championships, a bit like, who else have you got? Well, who is it? The Rosbergs, of course. Keke and Nico Rosberg, another father-son F1 world championships. Pretty incredible record there. So what else have we got on the notes here? Damon Hill sponsorship. Oh yeah, of course. So another friend, we mentioned that Harrison was a big fan of motorsport, not only on four wheels, but on two wheels as well. British legend Barry Sheene, motorcycle world champion, was another close friend of Harrison's. And in 1978, John Surtees, another, of course, motorcycle legend, F1 world championship, motorcycle world champion, the only man to win both the motorcycle world championship and the F1 world championship. Pretty incredible fellow. John Surtees arranged for George Harrison to have a private test in one of his own Formula One cars, a Surtees TS19 around Brands Hatch in 1978. Sheene and Harrison were both allowed to kind of take this car on track. I think the test was more for Sheene to see if he had real pace, and then towards the end of the day, you know, there's a great article about all this kind of Beatles F1 history in the race by Sam Smith. I'll leave a link to that along with the many others in the description of the video. And he, you know, one of the people that was interviewed in this article was there at the track, was a mechanic who was helping to set up the car, and remembered just the joy, the anticipation, the energy around that track for a fan like Harrison to get real time in the car. Like, you know, people dream of nowadays time in a modern Formula One car. I think if you've got the right corporate sponsors, you can get in. I think Renault run a program where you can drive an old car, but that's about it. I think there's I think Paul Ricard, you can drive a Renault if you've got enough money. But this wasn't a money thing. This was, you're so much of a friend of the sport of Formula One, you're given a free test almost, which is really amazing. I'll put some photos on the screen now. What else have we got here? So after the engine notes fade, of course, as we mentioned, the self-recorded engine notes, George Harrison starts with his guitar tones in the back of the taxi. Did I have written down what guitar it was? Yes, I did. It was a Zamietas Lotus 6-string guitar. Again, picture on screen now. That'll do a lot better than me just reading it out. But it's this really beautiful acoustic guitar. And of course, Harrison played many, many guitars throughout his years, and he chose this one for the sounds of Faster. The engine notes fade, and I think a really interesting detail about the song, the first line is chose a life in circuses. So he's talking about the Formula One drivers. He says they chose a life in circuses. And this was in the 70s, right? He was like, oh, this Formula One thing, it's a big reality show, a big drama, a big circus. These were things that he would say in the interviews. People would ask him about Formula One. I just think it's amazing to what would he think now, right? Like, it was a circus back then, and now people say that was the golden age, that was the freedom. So I think that the circus has only got bigger, only got crazier, and maybe has been the detriment to some of the kind of joy and the freedom of Formula One back in those days. I think one final thing I wanted to bring up, talking about this George Harrison song, was an analysis he gave himself. Right, he was reflecting in his autobiography in 1990 called "I Me Mine," an amazing book. Full of insight for Beatles fans, for racing fans, for everything. And he said, we've got it here. So these were words from George Harrison on his passion for motorsport. He said, and don't worry, I'm not going to do the accent. I don't think that would be enjoyable for anyone. But he said, I know that racing to a lot of people is dopey, maybe from a spiritual point of view. Motor cars, they're polluters, killers, maimers, noisemakers. But good racing involves heightened awareness for the competitors. Those drivers have to be so together in their concentration, and the handful of them who are the best have had some sort of expansion of consciousness. And I think it's really interesting to reflect on that, because, just as we're going through in 1990, that was through the rise of a young Ayrton Senna. And in the Senna documentary, one of the most remembered quotes, the most remembered scenes from that documentary is when Senna reflects on his time in the car, his kind of consciousness rising to this, primal level, this flow state in which he felt like a tunnel flowing through the track. He felt unable to detach himself from the car. And that was how he achieved his speed, by getting to this kind of supernatural flow, whatever, subconscious state. I just think that's really interesting. We talk about this kind of Daniel Kahneman, the behavioral economist, has this book called System, or what is it? Whatever. It's basically about two system thinking. So the functions of the mind, you have the automatic functions, and then you have the functions that are, require cognitive effort, require thought, right? So if I ask you 10 out of 10, the answer is 20. But if I ask you 25 times 16, you would have to do a bit of working out before you get to the answer. You could get to the answer, but it would require a different level of thought to get there. And that system one thinking, that automatic kind of, that's the real talent of the human mind to be able to process things on that level. For driving a Formula One car to become an automatic process where it's intuitive, where you feel the track, you feel everything, you're not taking the time to think, you're thinking at such an amazing speed that your body ascends to that level of consciousness. These are all observations I'm making now, and they were ones that were had by Harrison so long back in those days through his friendship to the drivers, and I just really think that's amazing. So yeah, that's kind of, that's a bit of an interesting reflection. I don't think there's anything else in my notes that I've missed out, but yeah, George Harrison, a main man in the paddock, a main figure in the history of music and Formula One, and really an amazing musician and an amazing guy. And we will remember him, of course, for the rest of time, Beatles fans and motorsport fans alike. So if you hadn't heard it yet, go check out Faster by George Harrison, another iconic Formula One song. Okay, so after that hopefully interesting history lesson, this is the fifth and final song we're going to be talking about today, and we're going all the way back to 1875. And if you can work out what this song is going to be, I'll give you a gold star in the comments, because we are talking about the song that plays on the F1 podium when they spray the Italian sparkling wine that's not champagne, but it's very similar to champagne, but it's not champagne. But we'll get into that later. What we're talking about first is the music, and it is the overture or the prelude to a musical called Carmen, written by Georges Bizet, a Frenchman, about a Spanish woman, interestingly enough. But it is a very, classical, an orchestra is inspired by what happens in the opera, or musical as it would be called now, but obviously it's an opera because it was written in the 1800s and it's uses operatic singing. But it was the direct choice of Bernie Ecclestone to have this be the song that plays on the podium. And honestly, I couldn't find a clear answer to when they started using it, but I know it's been there for a very, very long time. After the anthems, I was doing my research for this video. One of the songs that came up when I was kind of looking at answers to questions of what are the most iconic Formula One songs were the German national anthem from Michael Schumacher, the British national anthem for Lewis Hamilton, and all the other British winners throughout the years. But in modern Formula One, of course, just Lewis, really. And then now the Dutch national anthem, right? But the song that plays after the anthems, to me, is an iconic Formula One song, and that is Carmen. And the good thing about the fact that it's from 1875, it means it's out of copyright. The only song in this video that is out of copyright. It means I can play a sample now to jog your memory. It's a classical composition, as I said, inspired by what happens in the opera. One of the scenes in the opera is a bull running scene, which is kind of when you hear that crescendo of noise, of energy, of speed and celebration. That's inspired by the scene, which is then in turn inspired by the Spanish running of the bulls that Bizet used to kind of fuel his fire in the same way that Brian Tyler sought inspiration from the emotional journey of Formula One. This song, when it was written, in complete contrast to Brian Tyler, had nothing to do with Formula One. Obviously, there was barely cars at that time, but has become now an integral part of the Formula One experience, both at the track. You're watching podium celebrations and on TV. Points mean prizes. Being up on the podium is a critical part of any championship challenge in Formula One. And hopefully the more you hear this song, the better you're doing in that championship. If you're wondering why I was so pedantic in the intro and didn't say champagne, it's because the Ferrari Italian sparkling wine that is sprayed while this song plays is not champagne. And feel free to use this if you ever want to be a bit of an arsehole and correct anyone about it, just as I'm doing now. It's an Italian wine from the Trentino vineyard, and it's brewed using the same fermentation method as champagne. It's the only vineyard in Italy that is 100% dedicated to this fermentation method, which makes it, of course, effectively equivalent to champagne in how it's grown, how the grapes are grown, and how it's fermented in the bottle to achieve that sparkling effect. And it's a pretty prestigious sparkling wine in Italy. It's just as good as, if not better than the champagne that comes from champagne. Just like the cognac must come from cognac, right? There's that kind of that thing with champagne for wine nerds. But anyway, the Ferrari that's not Ferrari, champagne that's not champagne, that is sprayed while this song happens. Completely random tangent there. Great work, Jack. Anyway, Bizet composed this song as a combination, as I said, of tones and themes from the musical. One famous enjoyer of this musical back in the late 1800s when it came out is the chance for me to use my very useful philosophy degree because one of the enjoyers of Bizet was Friedrich Nietzsche. Again, very hard to say with my fantastic speech impediment there, but Nietzsche was a fan of Bizet, a fan of musicals. Repented against nihilism to the another pedantic thing. Most people associate Nietzsche with nihilism, but his primary goal of his work was to form a counter argument to it, not to present it in isolation. But anyway, Nietzsche was quoted as saying that he became a better man when Bizet speaks to me. And Bizet, when reflecting on his own song, said, his own opera, said, "I have written a work that is all clarity and vivacity. It is full of colour and melody." And those are all things I think, in my infinite wisdom, those are things we look for in Formula One too. And I think that's what makes this song really, really interesting, is that it's kind of, it has that element of drama, of passion, of fanfare, completely disconnected to Formula One. But Big Bernie found this song and thought this is the perfect song to play on the podium. And just like Lift Me Up, just like The Chain, just like Faster, and just like the Brian Tyler theme, it's now a song that is inseparable in our memories of Formula One and an essential part of the Formula One podium ceremony. So I hope that was a little bit interesting. We're wrapping up the video now. I've written, or read off, should I say, everything that's on my notes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there we are. See, what have I got written down here? I think that's plenty of information and script reading for one video. Thank you very much for watching. Leave a like to help out the channel and subscribe for more F1 news, interviews, history and analysis. Clearly wrote that in my script yesterday, thinking it was the perfect thing to say, so I think I'll leave it there. I'll let my outro music play, which, if you're interested, is either going to be the opening guitar riff to Zach Bryan's song Heading South, or Tyler Child's song, or Tyler Childers' song, Feathered Engines, unless I come up with anything else. I like to use the little country acoustic riffs, just because I think they're nice and simple. But anyway, that's everything that I can come up with for these 5 iconic Formula One songs. Thank you very much for watching. I will wrap this up now.